The beeping in the white room sounded like a tired drum. Grace lay on the hospital bed with a drip in her arm and a bruise on her cheek. Her husband, Daniel, stood at the foot of the bed in a clean shirt and shiny shoes. He was not holding her hand. He was holding his phone. A woman in a red dress, Melissa, leaned on his shoulder, smiling like the sun that burns crops. Daniel laughed loud enough to make the nurse turn. "Why should I pay?" Daniel said, raising his voice so other patients could hear. "Melissa is richer than you. I have better places to be." Grace's fingers trembled, but she did not cry. She had run out of tears 2 nights ago. Daniel waved a hand at the nurse. "Cancel her card," he said. "If she wants anything, let her beg. I'm done wasting money." He tapped Melissa's chin and they both walked toward the door. Melissa looked back, rolled her eyes and whispered, "Enjoy your stay." The door swung after them. As it began to close, an old woman pushing a mop paused in the doorway. Her hair was silver. Her eyes were bright, like the moon on dark water. She looked straight at Grace. "Child," the old woman said softly, "when the drum of shame is loud, the drum of destiny is louder. A kind heart never walks alone." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small woven bracelet with a single smooth shell, and laid it on the tray by the bed. Then she pushed her mop away and vanished around the corner as if she had melted into the walls. The nurse returned, frowning at the chart. "Your husband asked to freeze your account," she said. "But—" She looked toward the hallway, surprised. "Someone just paid part of your bill, a stranger. And, Ma'am, there are 2 men in suits in the corridor asking for you by name." Grace blinked. "For me?" Before the nurse could answer, the door opened again. 2 tall men in grey suits stepped in, carrying a leather case with brass corners. One of them bowed his head. "Mrs. Grace Carter," he said. "We come with a message from a benefactor." The beeping slowed. The room grew small and quiet. Grace tried to sit up, her heart thudding. A message? From who? The man undid the brass locks on the case. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay an old letter stamped with a crest she did not know, and a metal key so heavy the tray shook when he set it down. The nurse gasped. Grace's breath caught in her throat, and before she could touch the letter, footsteps thundered in the hall. Daniel burst back in with Melissa right behind him. He saw the letter, saw the key, and his face changed from proud to hungry in one heartbeat. "What is this?" he snapped, reaching for the letter. "Sir," the man said calmly, "this is not for you." But Daniel snatched the letter anyway, and as he jerked it open, the top half ripped free. For a bright, shocking moment, Grace saw a line of numbers shining like morning. 1.5. The nurse screamed for security. The screen beside Grace started to beep faster. Everything tilted, and the torn letter fluttered in the air like a bird with one wing. Grace had not always known the taste of hospital air. She loved the smell of cinnamon rolls in the morning and fresh rain on old roads. She grew up in a small town where people waved from porches and neighbors borrowed sugar like a song passed from mouth to mouth. As a girl, she learned that kindness is a basket. Fill it, and it will carry you. Her grandma, Ruth, told stories at twilight. She spoke of small birds that outflew storms because they knew when to bend their wings. She spoke of rivers that look quiet but carry gold under the mud. "Be gentle," Grandma Ruth would say, tapping Grace's forehead with a warm finger. "Gentleness is not weakness, it is a key. One day you will need a key." Grace thought it was only a story. Years later, she met Daniel at a street fair. He had a winning smile and quick hands. He bought her a lemonade and told her he loved big dreams, fast cars, big houses, bright lights. He said he loved her laugh too. For a while, Grace believed the 2 loves were the same. They married in spring when the dogwoods were white like little handkerchiefs. The church was small but full. People clapped. Daniel's promises were sweet, and so were the cakes at the reception. After the wedding, Grace rented a tiny storefront and opened Sunrise Bakes, a bakery that smelled like hugs. She gave leftover bread to the shelter. She kept a jar for anyone who could not pay. "Take what you need," the label said. At first, Daniel helped. He stood behind the counter telling jokes, making customers giggle. But he liked the praise more than the work. He began to come late. He said he had meetings. He said big dreams need big friends. Grace did not complain. She believed love is patient. She believed patience is strong. She kept the oven warm and the door open. Then came days when Daniel stayed out all night. He wore new watches. He bought shoes he did not need. He stopped answering when Grace called. The bakery still sang in the mornings. Cinnamon, vanilla, coffee. But at night the house felt like a large empty bowl. One evening, Daniel stumbled in smelling like perfume that did not belong to Grace. She looked at him with steady eyes. "Is there someone else?" she asked. He laughed. "Don't be dramatic." He kissed her quickly on the cheek, like a man dropping a coin he did not value, and went to shower. After that, there were shadows in every corner, but Grace still carried her basket of kindness. She watched a neighbor's baby when the mother had to work the night shift. She slipped a bag of groceries onto an old man's porch when no one else was looking. She brought hot tea to a woman with cold hands sitting on the bus stop bench. People said, "Bless you," and Grace said, "We are each other's umbrellas." Then her body began to whisper that something was wrong. Dizzy spells. A pain under her ribs like a small stone. She told Daniel. "Take some water," he said, scrolling on his phone. "You worry too much." The next week she collapsed in the bakery before the first batch of bread was done. The bell over the door had just rung. An old woman with silver hair had come in, holding a broom of straw like a staff. Grace remembered the old woman's eyes and a soft voice. "Child, sit." Then darkness folded her. She woke under bright hospital lights. She tried to breathe through a mask that smelled like plastic rain. The nurse said they would run tests. They said her body was tired and needed rest, medicine, and time. Daniel came once, took a photo of the IV, and posted it with a sad face emoji and the words, "Pray for my wife." Then he went out to smoke and never came back that night. The next morning, Melissa came in on high heels that clicked on the tiles like little hammers. She set down a bouquet that smelled too strong and smiled without warmth. "You know Daniel deserves happiness," she said as she trimmed the flower stems with tiny scissors. "You're always tired. He needs spark." Grace looked at the flowers. "You can go," she said quietly. "It's a free country," Melissa replied and took a selfie by the bed. That afternoon, the woman with the mop, the same old woman from the bakery, pushed her bucket down the hall. No one glanced at her. Only Grace saw, and she thought the woman nodded once, as if to say, "Keep going, child." The river looks still, but it moves. For a week, the hospital became a small village of faces. Nurse Faith, who hummed church songs while switching the drip. Mr. Thomas in the next bed, who told jokes about his knees. Little Lily down the hall, whose mother worked 2 jobs, and who loved the butter cookies Grace shared from her lunch tray. The world was still kind, even when it hurt. Daniel, however, grew sharper. He called the billing office more than he called Grace. One evening, he arrived with Melissa and laughed at the nurse's note about a family member receiving updates. "Family," he said loudly. "We'll see about that." The nurse frowned. Grace stared at the ceiling and counted the small holes in the tiles one by one, because numbers felt more honest than Daniel's voice. A day later, the old woman with the mop slipped in again. She left the small woven bracelet with the shell and said the words about the drums. And then came the moment, the loud moment, when Daniel mocked Grace in front of everyone and walked out with Melissa. This is where some people turn to stone, but stones, if you listen, still remember the river. The nurse had just told Grace that a stranger had paid part of her bill when the men in suits entered with the leather case. The letter, the heavy key, the crest that looked older than anything else in the room. The air felt like the pause before rain. "Mrs. Carter," the first man said, "we represent Holloway Finch. We have instructions to deliver this to you in person. We were to wait until—" The door crashed open, and Daniel surged in like a storm, eyes fixed on the case. The man tried to step between him and the bed, but Daniel was quicker. The letter tore. The bright piece with the numbers flashed. 1.5 Nurse Faith read, stunned. Security boots slapped the floor outside. The second man snatched the remaining half of the letter back to protect it. The heavy key clinked against the tray, and slid toward Grace's fingers. It was cold and sure, the way a truth is sure. Daniel lunged, knocking the tray. The key fell, hit the side rail and clattered to the floor. "Give me that," he shouted, grabbing at the case, at the men, at anything he could grab. "Sir, stop!" the nurse cried. Melissa put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide, then narrowed as a cat's when she saw the number again on the torn paper. Her hand went out too, quick and greedy. Security reached the doorway. "Sir, you need to calm down." In the chaos, Grace reached for the bracelet with the single shell and slipped it on her wrist. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting there since Grandma Ruth first told stories. A memory rose gentle and strong. "One day, you will need a key." Grace leaned over, ignoring the pull of the IV, and her fingertips found the metal key on the floor. She wrapped her palm around it and felt the weight of it settle into her bones. The key was not shiny. It was old, strong, and honest. It felt like a door she had been walking toward for years without knowing. "Mrs. Carter," the first man said above the noise, his voice a clear bell, "by instruction of your benefactor, you must be the first to hear the full message. We cannot disclose it in front of anyone who seeks you harm." Daniel heard the word benefactor and barked a bitter laugh. "There is no benefactor. There is only my wife trying to trap me with bills. Give me that paper." He lunged again. Security grabbed his arm. He twisted free with a roar and smacked the brass case off the bed. It hit the floor. The torn half of the letter fluttered up, and for one bright instant, all eyes saw it. 1.5b. The sound that followed was not loud. It was the hush that happens when truth steps into a room. Even the machines seemed to listen. Nurse Faith clapped a hand to her mouth. Mr. Thomas in the next bed sat up straighter. Little Lily in the hallway peered around her mother's skirt, eyes wide as coins. Melissa's smile cracked. Daniel's face went white, then red, then white again. He grabbed for the paper with both hands, like a man grabbing for a rope over deep water. Security moved, firm now. They pinned his wrists gently but surely. "Sir," the guard said, "enough." The men in suits picked up the brass case and the remaining half of the letter with careful hands. The first man looked at Grace with professional calm but human kindness in his eyes. "We need 5 minutes alone with you," he said softly. "It concerns a trust arranged many years ago. It concerns your mother's past." "My mother," Grace whispered. Her throat felt tight. Her mother had died when Grace was very young, leaving only a locket and a recipe book. A past? What kind of past could weigh as much as this key? An alarm blipped in the hallway. Someone shouted for a doctor 2 doors down. The hospital, which had become a village, remembered it was also a storm. Daniel struggled once more and then sagged, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the letter like a man watching the last boat pull away. Melissa stepped back from him, her face quick with calculations. Grace held the key to her chest. The bracelet with the shell tapped against the metal with a soft click. Grandma Ruth's words came again, not as a memory now, but as a thread pulling tight. "Be gentle. Gentleness is a key. One day, you will need a key." Grace lifted her chin. Though her body was weak, something inside her sat up tall. She looked at the men in suits. She looked at Nurse Faith. She looked at the security guard holding her husband at the door, like you would hold back a stranger from a sleeping child. 5 minutes, Grace said quietly. "But first, please take him outside." Daniel found his voice. "Grace, honey, you know I was only joking. Melissa, tell her. Tell her we were testing the nurses. We were—" Melissa took a tiny step toward the hallway and said nothing. Security guided Daniel out. The door closed with a soft click. The room exhaled. The first man placed the unbroken half of the letter on the bed beside Grace's hand and carefully unfolded it. The crest shone again. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we are here because—" A sudden crack split the air. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the building, a breaker tripped with a dull thud. The monitors around the ward let out a high, thin beep. The heavy generator rumbled, then coughed. The second man glanced at the ceiling. "Power surge," he murmured. The nurse moved quickly to check the IV. The door burst open again, not from Daniel this time, but from a young resident doctor with fear in his eyes. "Code blue in the elevator," he shouted. "We need all hands. A patient collapsed between floors." The hall exploded into motion. Carts squeaked, shoes slapped, voices layered over voices. Nurse Faith turned to Grace, torn between duty and worry. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll be right back." She dashed out. The two men in suits looked at each other, then at Grace, then at the humming fluorescent lights that looked like they might fail again. "Mrs. Carter," the first man said, lowering his voice and leaning close, "we must tell you now, even if it's only one sentence before the world pulls us apart again." Grace clutched the key. The paper lay open like a small, bright window. "Please," she whispered, "say it." He opened his mouth. The generator died with a final groan. The lights went out. The room plunged into deep, black quiet, broken only by the thin alarm of the heart monitor and the far-off shout of a nurse calling for flashlights. And in that darkness from the hallway came Daniel's voice, sharp, wild, and too close. "Open that door! I know what I saw! 1.5 billion!" The door handle rattled hard. The key in Grace's hand felt suddenly warmer, as if it knew a door was about to need it. The men in suits turned toward the sound, ready or not, and the chapter closed like the last clap of thunder before the rain. If you're moved by Grace's story and want more, type "continue" and tell me where you're watching from. Your comments keep the story going and help more people find it. The corridor rattled like a shaken tin roof as Daniel slammed the handle. "Open this door, I know what I saw." His shout ran down the dark hall, bounced off machines, and came back meaner. The power was gone. Only tiny red dots on the walls glowed, like sleepy eyes. The heart monitor beside Grace kept a thin, steady beep. The two men in grey suits stood wider, shoulders square, bodies between Grace and the door. "Mrs. Carter," the first man whispered, "hold the key tight. Do not let it go." Grace squeezed the cold metal in her palm. The shell on the bracelet tapped the key like a small drum. Her breath came slow and even. She refused to let fear boss her. From the hallway, a flashlight beam snapped on. A security guard's voice cut through. "Sir, back away from that door." "Make me," Daniel yelled. "She's my wife." Another beam joined the first. "You were escorted out," the second guard said. "Do not escalate." "Escalate?" Daniel laughed like a dog barking at thunder. "There's 1.5... "Keep your voice down," Melissa hissed. "People can hear." "I want that paper," Daniel snarled, and something hit the door hard, his shoulder or his fist, making the thin window shiver. The first man in the suit leaned close to Grace. "When the lights come back," he murmured, "we will request a private room and tell you more. Your safety comes first." "My safety," Grace whispered back, "and the truth." Footsteps thundered past as nurses ran toward the elevator where the emergency had been called. Someone handed out flashlights. A child cried. An old man said a prayer. The hospital, their small village, breathed in and out like one tired giant. The door handle rattled again. This time a firm voice snapped right outside. "Enough, sir." A scuffle, the thud of someone pinning someone else to the wall. Melissa's gasp. A pair of metal cuffs clicked. "You can't do this," Daniel shouted, his voice wobbling now. "This is illegal." "It is not," the guard said. "You are disturbing patients." A long sigh blew under the door. Then footsteps. Then silence, except for machines beeping and the distant sound of nurses helping someone breathe. The suits waited, listening. The second man eased the blinds aside. He peered into the hall, then nodded. "Clear." The first man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small penlight. He shielded it with his hand so the glow was soft, like a candle in cupped palms. He aimed it at the page lying open by Grace's knee. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice calm and low. "I'll start with names, so you know we are real people. I'm Mr. Lane, this is my colleague, Mr. Ortiz. We represent Holloway Finch, a trust and estate firm from the city." "Holloway Finch," Grace repeated. The letters tasted like stone and paper. "Who sent you?" A client who wished to stay private during your childhood, Mr. Lane said carefully. They left a set of instructions that would activate at a certain time. We tried to reach you last year, but your contact details changed. Then we tracked you to the bakery and learned of your hospital stay. My mother, Grace asked, because the first man had said the word before the blackout. You said my mother's passed. Mr. Ortiz nodded once. He moved the penlight closer to the crest on the paper. The mark looked like two birds facing each other with a key between them. Your mother, Elaine. The records say she was kind, careful, and very quiet about where she came from. She made a choice to live simple. But simple does not always mean small. Grace felt the key in her palm grow heavier, as if it had always known her mother's name and was glad to hear it said out loud. I only have a locket and a recipe book from her, Grace whispered. No stories. Grandma Ruth told me to be gentle. She said gentleness is a key. Mr. Lane's mouth twitched, like he almost smiled. Your grandmother was wise. The generator coughed awake with a groan. Lights blinked back on in strips. The machine steadied. The thin red dots turned white. Everyone in the hall cheered a little, tired but relieved. Nurse Faith hurried in, hair a bit messy, eyes bright. Are you okay? Power's back. The elevator patient is stable and... She caught sight of the paper and the key and her eyes softened. Do you want me to close the curtains? Please, Mr. Lane said. And if possible, may we have this door watched? We had a... visitor. Nurse Faith's face went firm. Already handled. 2 officers are stationed down the hall. Melissa left on her own. Daniel is in the lobby signing a behavior citation. He tried to argue, but rules are rules. She lowered her voice. I told security this room is private. Thank you, Grace said, meaning it like a hug. When the curtains closed and the door clicked, the room felt safe again. Mr. Lane set the torn half of the letter beside the unbroken half, careful not to mix them. He spoke slowly so each word could sit down on the bed and be heard. Mrs. Carter, he said, this letter confirms what we are allowed to say first. You are the single-named heir to a group of assets placed in trust many years ago. These assets include properties, shares, and cash equivalents. The total current valuation, audited last quarter, is approximately $1.5 billion. The number felt like lightning in a quiet field. It did not make a sound. It simply changed the sky. Grace did not gasp. She did not jump. She thought of cinnamon rolls at dawn and a neighbor's baby sleeping with one tiny hand arranged like a starfish on its cheek. She thought of Grandma Ruth tapping her forehead and telling her to stay gentle. She thought of the hospital bill that had scared Daniel more than her hurting. She thought of the old woman with the mop who had placed a shell bracelet by her hand, and how the shell had sounded like a drum when she picked up the key. I hear you, she said softly. But I need to understand. Why me? Why now? Mr. Ortiz lifted a small, leather-bound folder from the brass case. There are 3 things we can tell you today. Full details require a private setting and proof of identity steps you will meet easily. First, the trust set an age and a circumstance. You met both this month. Second, your mother left a phrase to pass from our lips to your ears. He glanced to Mr. Lane, who nodded. We were instructed to say it only when your hand touched the key. Grace lifted the key again. The metal was cool now, but sure. The shell on her bracelet clicked softly against it as if saying, go on. Mr. Ortiz spoke the phrase, each word careful. When kindness is treated like weakness, and you are left in the dark, remember that the sun is still on your side. Something inside Grace, something like a door, opened a few inches. The words felt like a blanket tucked under her chin. She did not know why, but she knew the phrase was hers. Third, Mr. Lane continued, there is a safety deposit box downtown. This key opens it. Inside are documents, passports, deeds, letters that explain the story that started before you were born. We will escort you there when you are medically cleared. Grace nodded. The beep of the monitor steadied her. Beep, breathe, beep, believe. Will the money make me hard? She asked suddenly, eyes filling. I don't want to change into someone who stops seeing people. Mr. Lane's gaze softened. Money amplifies who we already are. It is a tool A tool in gentle hands builds, in cruel hands it breaks. Mr. Ortiz looked at the bracelet on Grace's wrist. "It seems," he said, "that gentle hands raised you." Grace brushed the shell with her thumb. "My grandmother taught me. My mother must have loved me in her quiet way. And this hospital is full of people who need umbrellas." She smiled at Nurse Faith, who pretended to be busy with a chart but smiled back. Less noise hummed in the hall now. The old building sighed. Overhead, an intercom apologized for the outage and thanked everyone for their patience. People in white and blue kept moving like bright fish in a careful stream. A man with a clipboard knocked and peeked in. "Facilities," he said. "Just checking sockets. You folks good?" "We're fine," Nurse Faith said. "Thank you." He nodded and moved on. Small life kept happening. A sip of water, a new blanket, a tiny joke from Mr. Thomas in the next bed about how power outages are free naps you didn't ask for. Grace let the quiet settle. She could not run, could not leap, could not fix everything in 1 hour, but she could listen. She could decide. "Please," she said at last, "I want to do this right. I want to tell the truth to myself before I tell it to anyone else. Can you help me move safely? Daniel—" She stopped. She didn't want to speak his name like it ruled the room. "My husband is angry and greedy right now. We will secure a private room and arrange a patient advocate immediately," Mr. Lane said. "We'll also document what just occurred. The trust can provide security." "Good," Nurse Faith said, writing fast. "I'm also flagging your chart for no visitors except approved names. It's your right." "Thank you," Grace said again, because gratitude puts air in tired lungs. Mr. Ortiz tucked the torn edge of the letter inside a protective sleeve. "We will take this piece for safekeeping and leave you a duplicate copy. The proof of funds should not be waved around." Grace almost laughed. "No, I don't plan to stick it on the fridge." They all smiled, a small human moment in a room that had just hosted a storm. The old woman with the mop slipped by the doorway, as if she had been listening for calm. She glanced in. For a heartbeat, her eyes met Grace's. She lifted 2 fingers to her brow like a tiny salute and moved on, the bucket wheels humming a low, gentle song. "Who is she?" Mr. Lane whispered, curious. "A friend," Grace said, "the kind that shows up when drums are loud." Mr. Thomas in the next bed coughed softly, then called out, "Hey, neighbor, you okay over there?" Grace turned her head and smiled. "I think so." "Good," Mr. Thomas said. "Because when they turned off the lights, I dreamed I was young and dancing again. If you can inherit anything for me, inherit that rhythm." "I'll try," Grace said, and everyone chuckled. Less extreme things filled the next hour like warm soup. Paperwork, soft voices, a gentle sponge bath, a change of sheets. Mr. Lane called his office and spoke in short, precise words. Mr. Ortiz texted a driver to wait at the hospital entrance for later. Nurse Faith checked Grace's vitals and whispered that the cafeteria had peach cobbler if anyone needed comfort in a bowl. When the door cracked open again, it wasn't Daniel. It was a social worker named Ms. Brooks with soft eyes and firm hands. She explained patient rights in plain words: who could visit, who could not, what to do if someone tried to push past rules. "No one can force you," she said gently. "No one." Grace listened hard. She signed where she needed to sign. Inside, a small fire lit, steady, not wild. She felt like a woman who had been walking in a fog and had found a lamp. As evening came, the sky out the window turned purple. The city's lights began to sparkle like tiny promises. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz stood to go, but promised to return early the next morning with a plan for the bank visit, the identity checks, and a path that kept noise low and dignity high. "Keep the key with you," Mr. Lane said. "Sleep with it under your pillow if you like. We'll guard the door tonight with hospital security, but the key belongs to your hand." Grace slid the key into a small cloth pouch Nurse Faith found in a drawer and tied it to the rail near her pillow, then slipped the bracelet under her palm. She felt safe enough to close her eyes for a minute, safe enough to dream a little. The hallway grew quieter. Machines hummed low. Mr. Thomas turned his television to a game show and lowered the sound until the jokes were only smiles, not noise. Lily down the hall laughed once, a high, clear bell, and then her mother shushed her tenderly. The world was softer. Grace dozed and woke to a whisper like dry leaves. Psst! Her eyes opened. She thought it was the old woman with the mop, but the figure at the foot of the bed was shorter, younger. A volunteer? No, the face was too painted, the perfume too strong, the smile tight. "Melissa," Grace said, voice steady. Melissa's eyes glittered in the dim. She had traded her red dress for a nurse's jacket. It hung wrong on her, the way a lie hangs wrong on a kind mouth. She held a tray with 2 paper cups and a syringe in a clear wrapper. "I brought your pain meds," she said lightly. Grace did not reach for anything. "You're not a nurse," Melissa pouted. "Don't be rude, I'm trying to help." She set the tray down, close to the rail where the key pouch hung. Her eyes drifted to the knot tied tight near Grace's pillow. "Also, we should talk. Daniel is upset. He says you're confused. He says you don't need all this drama." "Daniel needs to leave me alone," Grace answered, low and level. "He needs to learn what kindness is. He forgot." Melissa's lips pressed into a line. "Kindness doesn't pay for a Porsche." "No," Grace said, "but it pays for a good night's sleep." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Listen, sign over." She caught herself. "I mean, let us help you manage what you saw. Big numbers are scary. Daniel knows investments. He knows people. You could lose everything by accident." Grace raised her head a little. The bracelet shell clicked softly again, like a warning. "Please step away from my bed." Melissa's gaze snapped to the pouch. For a heartbeat, her whole face burned with want. She reached, fingers quick. A hand clamped on her wrist, small, brown, strong. The old woman with the mop had appeared like a shadow turning into a person. "No, child," the old woman said softly. "That is not yours." Melissa jerked, startled. "Who are you?" "A cleaner," the old woman said, eyes bright as the moon. "And a watcher, and a teacher of small lessons." She nodded toward the door. "This room is watched. Say good night." Before Melissa could speak, a deeper voice joined them. "It is watched," said the security guard, stepping in, another officer behind him. "Ma'am, you were warned. You cannot be in here." Melissa's mouth twisted. For a second she looked like she would fight. Then her face smoothed into a sugar-sweet smile that fooled no one. "Of course," she said. "I only wanted to help." She backed out. As she passed the cleaner, she whispered, "Old women should mind their mops." The old woman stood firm. "Old women mind the world," she replied softly. "We learned it because men forgot." The guards walked Melissa away. The old woman picked up her mop, dipped it in the bucket, and drew a small circle on the floor with water, like someone blessing a place. She turned to Grace and her voice went soft again. "Child, storms test roofs. Your roof is strong." "Who are you to me?" Grace asked, sudden tears pricking her eyes. "You keep showing up." "A neighbor," the woman said. "A drum. A reminder that kindness walks with angels even in ugly rooms." She winked, then pushed her bucket out into the hall, humming a tune that sounded old as hills. Grace lay back. Her chest felt tight and warm all at once. She looked at the key under her pillow and whispered, "Thank you." She did not know if she spoke to the old woman, her mother, her grandmother, or God. Maybe all of them. Maybe the shell heard. Mr. Thomas coughed. "You've got visitors at night," he called softly, trying to make light. "I have protectors," Grace answered, and the word felt right. Nurse Faith returned with a flashlight tucked into her pocket and a look that said she had heard enough in the hall to fill a notebook. "All okay?" "Yes," Grace said, "but I might need a lock on this window too." "We'll put one tomorrow," Nurse Faith promised. "For now, rest. The men will be back early. We'll move you to a more secure floor." Grace closed her eyes again. The monitor kept time. Beep. Breathe. Beep. Believe. She floated for a few minutes between sleep and wakefulness, like a leaf on warm water. Then, from far below, something boomed, a heavy sound like a door forced open. A second boom followed. The building trembled just enough to make the curtain rings whisper. The intercom crackled. "Attention, staff. Security to the loading dock. Repeat, security to the loading dock. In the same breath, the hall filled with shouting, running. The smell of cold night air burst in from somewhere below. Tires squealed. A car engine revved hard. Mr. Thomas sat up, startled. Nurse Faith rushed to the door, opened it and froze. As an orderly whispered fast in her ear, her face changed. She whirled back to Grace, eyes wide, voice tight and urgent. "Melissa just helped Daniel slip out of the lobby," she said, "and someone broke into the records office. Your file is missing." Before Grace could answer, her phone, one she hadn't touched in days, buzzed in the drawer. Nurse Faith pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and held it up with shaking hands. A new photo had been sent from an unknown number, a picture of a man's hand holding a sharp box cutter next to a familiar cloth pouch, the twin of the one tied to Grace's rail. The message under the photo read, "Bring the key to the south parking lot in 10 minutes or the bakery gets a visit." The tiny room went very, very still. The key under Grace's pillow felt heavy as a bell that had to be rung, and the chapter snapped shut like a trap in tall grass. The photo on Grace's phone burned into her eyes, a hand gripping a box cutter, the cloth pouch she had seen tied to her rail, its twin, dangling from the wrist. The message was short, but sharp. "Bring the key to the south parking lot in 10 minutes or the bakery gets a visit." Her heart pounded. The bakery, Sunrise Bakes, the little shop that smelled of cinnamon and hope, where neighbors found shelter and strangers found bread. The place she had built with her 2 hands, where her kindness lived in jars and ovens. The thought of it broken made her chest ache worse than the IV needle. Nurse Faith's face tightened. "This is extortion. We'll alert security." "No," Grace whispered, pressing the phone against her chest. "If they touch the bakery, the whole town suffers. That shop feeds people, Faith." Mr. Lane leaned forward, calm but urgent. "This is manipulation, Mrs. Carter. They are trying to force your hand before you know the full truth. We'll handle it." Mr. Ortiz already had his phone out, texting fast. "I'm alerting the Trust Security Division. They'll send people to the bakery now." "But will they be fast enough?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. She pictured Mrs. Caldwell, who came every morning for a roll and a story. She pictured little Benny, whose sticky hands loved to press the bakery window while he chose his muffin. She pictured the jar labeled, "Take what you need." That jar was her soul. If Daniel or Melissa touched it. She shivered. Mr. Lane placed a hand on the edge of her bed. "Listen to me. You are not powerless. They want you scared, not wise. You have allies now. Let us use them." The old woman with the mop appeared again, quiet as a shadow, leaning on her bucket. Her silver hair glowed in the dim hospital light. She looked at Grace, then at the phone in her hand. "Child," she said softly, "a thief who threatens your bread fears your spirit. Keys open more than doors, they open choices. Do not hand your choice to a snake." Grace looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. The shell tapped against her skin like a drum beat. Be gentle. Gentleness is a key. But was gentleness strong enough against knives and greed? "I don't know what to do," she admitted. The old woman's eyes glimmered. "Do what is right, not what is rushed. The storm will pass. Your bakery is not built only of wood and sugar. It is built of kindness. Kindness is harder to burn." Before Grace could speak, the intercom crackled again. "Security teams, respond to South Lot immediately. Possible armed suspect. Repeat, South Lot." Everyone froze. Mr. Ortiz's phone buzzed. He read the message and paled. "They're already at the South Lot. Melissa was seen. Daniel's car is running." Mr. Lane swore under his breath. "We need to move you now. If they can't get the key, they may try to get you." Nurse Faith gripped the bedrail. "We'll transfer her to ICU North. Restricted access, only one elevator, but we need to hurry." Grace clutched the real key tighter. Its cold weight steadied her. She whispered to herself, "Do not give your choice to a snake." The men prepared to wheel her bed. Nurse Faith grabbed fresh gloves and sheets to disguise the move. The old woman with the mop stepped into the hallway, humming a tune as if nothing was wrong, but her eyes scanned every shadow. They pushed Grace into the corridor. Lights flickered again as the generator strained. Voices rose from the south end of the hospital, shouts and pounding footsteps. A crash echoed up the stairwell. Then a woman's voice shrieked, "Daniel, stop!" They hurried faster. Grace's heart thundered with each push of the wheels. Mr. Thomas peeked out of his room and called, "Stay safe, neighbor!" Grace raised her hand weakly in reply. As they turned a corner, a shape darted out. Melissa, still wearing the stolen nurse's jacket, her eyes wild. She lunged for the bed, fingers outstretched toward the pouch tied at the rail. Grace's scream split the air. The old woman swung her mop like a staff, striking Melissa's wrist. The syringe in Melissa's hand clattered to the floor and rolled under a cart. Melissa cursed, clutching her arm. "Go!" the old woman barked, her voice sharper than Grace had ever heard. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz pushed harder, wheels squealing. Nurse Faith blocked Melissa with her body. The old woman stood like a wall, mop braced, eyes blazing like stormlight. Grace clutched the key to her chest, the pouch, the bracelet, the shell, all trembling together. Behind them, Melissa screamed Daniel's name. And ahead, in the glow of the emergency lights, the elevator doors slid open with a chime too calm for the storm rushing into their world. The bed rolled forward. The men leaned in, muscles straining. But as the doors began to close, a pair of strong hands shot between them, forcing them back open. A shadow stepped inside, tall and furious. Daniel. His eyes were wild, his shirt torn, his jaw tight. "Give me the key, Grace," he roared, stepping toward the bed. The doors slid shut behind him with a heavy click. Now it was just Grace, the key, the suits, and Daniel, trapped in a steel box that began to descend, and the chapter slammed shut like a coffin lid. The elevator groaned as it descended, the cables creaking like tired bones. The fluorescent lights inside flickered, casting uneven shadows across the walls. Grace's heart raced faster than the machine itself. She was trapped in the steel box with Daniel, the man who had once promised to protect her, but who now looked at her as if she were a vault to be broken open. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz stood on either side of Grace's bed, tense but steady. Mr. Lane's jaw tightened, while Mr. Ortiz subtly reached into his jacket, ready for anything. The pouch with the key dangled from the rail, brushing lightly against Grace's side. She clutched it with both hands now, determined not to let go. Daniel's eyes were bloodshot, his shirt half torn from his scuffle with security. His breathing came heavy, wild, like a beast cornered yet still dangerous. His eyes locked on Grace's hand. "Give it to me," he barked, stepping closer, his shoes squealing on the linoleum floor. "Grace, that money isn't yours. You'll waste it on bakeries and pity. I know how to use it. I know how to multiply it. Don't you get it? We'll be untouchable." Grace's throat ached, but her voice came steady. "Daniel, it was never about money. It's about who we are when no one is watching." "Spare me your kindness sermons," he spat. His voice echoed harshly in the small space. "Melissa was right. You're too soft, too weak. But me, I know power when I see it. I know what $1.5 billion means. Do you think your little loaves of bread and jars for the poor matter? That's pocket change compared to what we could have." His words cut sharp, but Grace did not flinch. She remembered Grandma Ruth's stories about rivers that looked quiet but carried gold beneath the mud. She remembered the shell bracelet, tapping like a drum against her skin. Gentleness was not weakness. It was a key. "You left me to suffer on that hospital bed," Grace said, her voice calm, though her eyes burned. "You mocked me in front of strangers. You chose your mistress over me. Why should I trust you with even a coin, let alone billions?" Daniel froze for a second, as if the mirror she held up shocked him. Then his face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing the rail of the bed. The entire elevator jolted under his weight. Grace gasped, clutching the pouch tighter. "Sir, step back," Mr. Lane said firmly, his voice low but commanding. He stepped between Daniel and Grace, but Daniel shoved him aside, desperation giving him strength. Mr. Ortiz grabbed Daniel's arm, but Daniel twisted free, wild and slippery. The elevator lurched again, and suddenly the lights flickered out. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the faint red glow of the emergency bulb above. The machine groaned to a stop between floors. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Daniel's breathing filled the silence. Perfect, he hissed. No one can stop me now. He lunged again, this time directly at Grace's hands. She cried out, her frail body pressing back against the pillows. Mr. Ortiz locked his arms around Daniel's shoulders, dragging him back with all his strength. Daniel thrashed, his elbow catching Ortiz hard in the ribs. Ortiz groaned but didn't let go. Mr. Lane, steady even in the dark, reached for the emergency phone on the wall. He lifted the receiver, but static hissed back. Dead. They cut the line, he muttered grimly, or the outage killed it. Grace's chest heaved. The key in her palm felt heavier than ever, like a destiny she hadn't asked for, but could not reject. She looked at Daniel, who snarled and struggled like a cornered wolf. This man, the one she had once trusted with her heart, was now the storm, tearing through her life. She thought of her bakery. She thought of the neighbors whose bellies had been filled when they had no coin. She thought of the old woman with the mop, who had told her the drum of destiny was louder than shame. And she knew she must protect this inheritance not for herself, but for those who had nothing. The elevator shook again as Daniel kicked backward, slamming Ortiz into the wall. The guard slipped, and Daniel broke free, turning once more toward Grace. His shadow loomed, larger than the red emergency glow. Grace's voice, however, rose steady. "Daniel, stop. If you touch me again, you'll lose more than money. You'll lose yourself." For the briefest second, his eyes flickered. Behind the greed, behind the fury, she glimpsed the man she had married, the young dreamer who bought her lemonade at a fair, but the flicker vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by hunger. "You don't get to decide," Daniel shouted, raising his fist. And then the elevator groaned, shuddered, and dropped. All four of them screamed as the box fell 3 feet before jerking to a stop. Sparks flew from the ceiling, filling the air with the acrid scent of burned wires. Grace clutched the rail, her knuckles white. Daniel staggered, slamming into the wall. The emergency bulb flickered, then steadied again. The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing. Mr. Lane's voice came sharp. "This is over, you will not harm her." But Daniel only laughed, a low, broken sound. He slid down the wall, sweat dripping from his forehead, his eyes never leaving Grace's hand. "You think you can keep it from me. You can't. Even if you hide the key, even if you hide yourself, I'll find it. I'll find all of it." Grace tightened her grip around the pouch. "And when you do," she said softly, "it will slip through your hands like water, because money without kindness is poison." For a moment, silence. Then a metallic screech above them, the sound of the maintenance hatch being pulled open. A beam of light flooded the car. A voice called down, "Emergency rescue, is everyone safe?" Grace's heart lifted. Mr. Ortiz called back, "We're here. 4 occupants, 1 restrained." He shot a glare at Daniel. Strong arms lowered a rope ladder. Within minutes, hospital security dropped through the hatch, flashlights blazing. They grabbed Daniel before he could react, pinning his arms behind his back. He roared in protest, but they cuffed him firmly. Grace exhaled shakily, her whole body trembling. She clutched the pouch to her chest, the key pressing into her skin. As Daniel was dragged toward the ladder, he shouted one last time, voice hoarse, "Grace, this isn't over. That money is mine. I'll make sure of it." But Grace only closed her eyes. "Not yours, never yours." The security team guided her bed up through the hatch with careful precision, lifting her into the bright glow of the maintenance floor. Fresh air hit her face, cool and sharp. Nurses and staff rushed to steady her, checking her vitals. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz climbed after her, dust streaking their suits, but determination in their eyes. Daniel's shouts echoed below as they dragged him down another stairwell. Melissa's voice floated faintly from the distance, screaming his name. Grace lay back, tears pricking her eyes. The key was still in her hand. The shell bracelet still tapped its quiet rhythm. She whispered to herself, "Kindness is a key, and I will not waste it." The old woman with the mop appeared once more at the edge of the crowd, her eyes glimmering. She met Grace's gaze, nodded once, and whispered, "The storm has not ended, child, but the roof is holding." And then she vanished again into the shadows, leaving behind the faint scent of soap and rain. The hospital staff wheeled Grace toward her new secure room, but even as the lights brightened and safety surrounded her, she knew this was only one battle. The war was still ahead, for Daniel was not finished, and $1.5 billion had a way of making snakes crawl out of every shadow. The chapter ended on that heavy truth. An extreme event survived, but a darker storm gathering beyond the hospital walls. The hospital felt quieter than it had in days. Security guards patrolled the hallways, their radios crackling softly. Nurses whispered to one another, their eyes sharp with caution. Though Daniel had been dragged away in handcuffs and Melissa vanished into the night, Grace knew peace was only borrowed time. She lay in her new secure room, the curtains drawn, the door guarded. Beside her bed, the pouch with the heavy key rested beneath her pillow. She kept her hand over it as though it were her heartbeat. The shell bracelet tapped against the metal now and then, steady as a drum. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz sat in chairs at her bedside. Their suits were wrinkled from the chaos, but their eyes held resolve. Nurse Faith hovered nearby, adjusting the monitors with practiced calm. Grace spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "He won't stop. Daniel will come back. And Melissa. She's as dangerous as he is." Mr. Lane leaned forward. "Yes. But now you are no longer alone, Mrs. Carter. We'll ensure their reach does not break you. What matters is that you understand the truth of what you hold. That way, no one can twist it against you." Grace nodded slowly. "Then tell me everything. About my mother. About the inheritance. I need to know why all this is happening now." Mr. Ortiz opened the leather folder again, the one that carried the document sealed with the crest of two birds holding a key. He laid a letter on the tray table, sliding it toward her. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was strong. "This," he said, "was written by your mother before you were born, Elaine Carter. She entrusted it to Holloway Finch with instructions that it remain sealed until her daughter reached 35, or until a crisis forced its delivery." Grace's hands trembled as she touched the paper. She could almost feel her mother's warmth seeping through the fibers. Slowly, she unfolded it. The letter began with her mother's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, I am gone from your side. Forgive me. I lived quietly so you could live kindly, but kindness does not mean smallness. You come from a line that carried great responsibility I chose to step away from because the weight of it broke too many hearts." Grace's vision blurred with tears. She blinked hard and kept reading. "The assets I leave you are not only money, they are buildings, companies, farmland, and ships. They were built by your grandfather and his father before him. Some were gained by toil, some by sacrifice, and some by mistakes we prayed to mend. When I chose to walk away, I prayed you would grow free of greed, so that if destiny called, you would carry it with a gentle heart. That day has come. The key you hold will open the deposit box with all the records. Use it wisely, my child. Build, do not break. Give, do not hoard. And remember, when kindness is treated like weakness, the sun is still on your side." Grace pressed the paper to her chest. It was as though her mother's voice was in the room, whispering in her ear. She thought of every day she had baked bread, every coin she had given freely, every smile she had shared with a stranger. Those had not been weakness, they had been preparation. Mr. Lane's voice broke the silence gently. "Now you see, Mrs. Carter, this inheritance was never meant to be a trap. It is a legacy, and legacies are meant to be carried with dignity." Grace nodded slowly. "I understand, but Daniel, he will twist this if he gets another chance. And Melissa, too. They won't stop." Mr. Ortiz set the folder down firmly. "We will make sure the law is on your side. The moment you are discharged, we'll escort you to the deposit box. Until then, security will remain here." Just then, Nurse Faith's pager beeped. She excused herself to check the nurse's station. The room fell quieter. Grace's fingers traced the shell bracelet absently. "Do you think," she asked softly, "money really changes people? Daniel wasn't always like this. He once laughed with me in the bakery. He once held my hand like it mattered." Mr. Lane exchanged a look with Ortiz. "Money doesn't change people," Lane said carefully. "It reveals them. It's a magnifying glass. Whatever lives inside grows larger. Your husband chose greed. You chose kindness. That is why this inheritance found its way to you, not him." Grace looked down at the bracelet. "Be gentle. Gentleness is a key." The words echoed again in her heart. The door clicked open, and Nurse Faith hurried back in, her face pale. "We have a problem," she whispered. "What is it?" Ortiz asked sharply. "Daniel was released," Faith said. "Melissa posted bail. They're out already." Grace's stomach dropped. "What? After what he did?" Faith nodded grimly. "He had a lawyer waiting, and they've been seen outside the hospital, circling in a black car. Security spotted them twice." Lane stood immediately. "Then it's time to move you tonight, Mrs. Carter. If they're this desperate, they won't stop until they try something else. The sooner we reach that deposit box, the sooner you have legal proof strong enough to crush their claims." Grace clutched the key tighter. Fear prickled her skin, but beneath it was resolve. She would not run forever. She would face this storm. "Then let's go," she whispered. "Tonight?" 2 hours later, just past midnight, Grace was wheeled quietly out of the hospital's rear entrance. The air was cool and damp, the streets lit only by scattered lamps. A black SUV waited at the curb, its tinted windows gleaming under the moonlight. Mr. Lane and Mr. Ortiz climbed in first, scanning the lot for threats. 2 plainclothes security officers followed, their hands resting near their holsters. Nurse Faith squeezed Grace's hand before she was lifted gently into the back seat. "Be safe," Faith whispered, "and remember us when you can. You've got an entire hospital rooting for you." Grace smiled faintly, her heart warmed by the nurse's kindness. Then the doors shut, and the SUV rolled into the night. For several minutes, the ride was silent, the city lights blurring past. Grace held the pouch in her lap, the key pressing into her palm. She whispered a prayer under her breath, not for wealth but for wisdom. Then headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. A black sedan was following them. Ortiz cursed under his breath. "They're on us." Lane spoke calmly to the driver. "Don't panic. Increase speed gradually. Head toward the bank district." The SUV picked up pace, weaving through the streets, but the sedan kept behind them, its engine growling. Grace's pulse quickened. She leaned forward, clutching the pouch tighter. Through the window, she saw Melissa's sharp face in the passenger seat of the sedan. Daniel was at the wheel, his jaw tight, eyes locked on them like a predator. "They'll chase us until morning," Ortiz muttered. "No," Grace said suddenly, her voice stronger than she felt. "This ends tonight." The men looked at her, surprised. "My mother left me this legacy to build, not to run. If Daniel wants to face me, let him. Take me to the deposit box, now." Lane studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. We'll trust your courage." The SUV swerved sharply, cutting down a narrow street toward the old financial district. The sedan followed, tires squealing. Finally, they pulled into a quiet underground garage beneath a grand stone building. The words Holloway Finch Trust Bank were etched in gold above the doors. Security officers jumped out, scanning the area as the SUV doors opened. Grace was wheeled quickly inside, the key clutched tight in her hand. The marble lobby echoed with their footsteps as they approached a heavy steel door marked Vault Access. Daniel's voice boomed suddenly behind them. "Stop right there." He and Melissa stormed in, flanked by 2 men Grace had never seen before, rough-looking, with hard eyes. Mercenaries. Daniel pointed at Grace. "That key is mine." Melissa's smile was sharp as a knife. "You think you can hide billions in a bakery girl's hands? Hand it over, Grace, before someone gets hurt." Security raised their weapons. Ortiz and Lane stepped protectively in front of Grace. The marble hall filled with the crackle of tension, like the sky before lightning. And in the center of it all, Grace sat in her chair, the key clutched in her palm, her heart pounding like a drum. She realized the moment had come, not just to protect the inheritance, but to prove who she truly was. Her voice rang clear across the hall. "If you want this key, Daniel, then you'll have to take it from me. But hear me now. You will not use it to destroy. You will not use it to feed your greed. This legacy is mine, and it is meant for kindness, not cruelty." Her words echoed in the marble chamber, strong and unshaken. Daniel snarled, taking a step forward. Melissa's hand twitched toward her bag, and then the vault door began to open with a deep, rumbling groan. The chapter ended there, on the edge of revelation, as the inheritance itself prepared to reveal its secrets. The vault door yawned open with a heavy groan, its hinges grinding like the echo of buried history. The air that poured out was cool, dry, and smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Grace's heart pounded as the marble chamber filled with the sound of the great door unlocking. Daniel froze for a second, the raw greed in his eyes, flickering into awe. Melissa's lips parted, her hungry gaze fixed on the widening gap. The two mercenaries at their sides shifted impatiently, ready for a fight if it meant access to whatever lay beyond. But Grace wasn't staring at Daniel or Melissa. She was staring at the darkness inside the vault, an ancient shadow holding secrets meant for her hand alone. The shell bracelet tapped against the key still clenched in her palm. Be gentle. Gentleness is a key. Mr. Lane turned to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Mrs. Carter, the vault recognizes your key and identity. You alone have the authority to enter. No one else." Grace nodded. She had been trembling minutes ago in the SUV, but now something deeper anchored her. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving that kindness could stand against greed. Security officers stepped forward, blocking Daniel and Melissa as they tried to surge closer. Daniel roared, straining against the guards. "That's my wife. What's hers is mine." Grace lifted her chin, her eyes fierce. "No, Daniel. What's mine is not yours. Not anymore." The mercenaries bristled, but Ortiz drew a sleek metal baton from his jacket and snapped it open with a crack. Lane stood beside him, calm but ready, his stance saying he would not let harm reach Grace. Nurse Faith's words echoed in Grace's mind. "Remember us when you can. You've got an entire hospital rooting for you." That was her reason. Not the marble floor, not the vault, not even the staggering number written on torn paper. It was the people who needed shelter when storms came. She rolled her wheelchair forward, past Lane and Ortiz, past the armed guards, until the edge of the vault's darkness stretched before her. The floor inside glowed faintly with lights that flickered awake as though recognizing her presence. Within the vast chamber, rows of steel drawers lined the walls like sleeping giants, and in the center sat a pedestal upon which rested a black chest bound with brass corners. Grace's fingers trembled as she slid the heavy key into the lock on the chest. It turned with a deep click. Behind her, Daniel shouted, "Grace, don't you dare!" But the words were drowned by the echoing creak of the chest opening. Inside lay documents neatly stacked, deeds, ledgers, share certificates, and letters sealed with wax. Atop them all lay a leather-bound book, its cover embossed with the same crest of two birds holding a key. Grace lifted the book carefully. Her mother's handwriting sprawled across the first page. "This legacy is not wealth alone. It is responsibility. To hold power without kindness is to poison the earth. To hold kindness without power is to risk being silenced. You, my child, must carry both." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She whispered the words aloud, her voice carrying through the chamber like a prayer. Melissa hissed, her patience gone. She lunged forward only to be stopped by a guard who shoved her back hard. Her smile cracked into rage. "You can't keep billions away from us. Do you know how many people would worship us for it?" Grace turned, her face calm but firm. "Melissa, money won't buy you worship. It'll buy you fear. And fear doesn't last. Kindness does." Daniel's face twisted. "You're a fool, Grace. Do you think kindness will protect you when the wolves come? Do you think your soft heart can hold this mountain of gold?" Grace met his gaze with a strength he hadn't seen in her before. "Yes, because I've held heavier things. I've held loneliness. I've held betrayal. I've held sickness, and still smiled at strangers. You left me to die in a hospital bed, Daniel. But I didn't die. I lived, and I'll use this inheritance to make others live too." For a moment, silence. Even the mercenaries shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Something in Grace's words rang too true even for hardened men. Then Daniel snapped, his greed drowning out any trace of humanity left. With a roar, he wrenched free from the guard's grip and charged straight for Grace. His hands clawed at the book, at the key, at anything he could rip from her. "Mine!" he shouted. "It's all mine!" Grace clutched the book to her chest, the shell bracelet tapping the brass clasp. The guards surged forward, but Daniel was too close. His shadow loomed over her, his hand reaching, and suddenly the old woman with the mop was there. No one saw her enter, but she stood at the edge of the vault, her silver hair glowing faintly in the light. Her eyes burned bright as coals. She raised her mop like a staff and slammed it against the marble floor. "Enough!" she thundered, her voice echoing with power that seemed older than the vault itself. Daniel froze mid-step, his hand inches from Grace's face. Everyone, guards, mercenaries, even Melissa, turned toward the old woman, their eyes wide. She looked directly at Daniel. "You mock kindness as weakness. You trample love for lust. You leave your wife in sickness and think yourself strong. But hear me, Daniel Carter. The river does not forget the stone that blocks its path. And tonight, the river runs over you." Daniel staggered back as though struck by an invisible force. His eyes widened with fear for the first time. Who are you?" The old woman's gaze softened as she turned to Grace. "Child, I am what your grandmother prayed for. I am what your mother hoped you'd find. I am the drum of destiny walking beside you." Grace's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her voice broke into tears. The old woman reached out, touching the shell bracelet lightly. "This was not given by chance. It was placed on your wrist to remind you, gentleness is not weakness. It is strength enough to carry." "Nations!" Melissa hissed, backing toward the door. "This is madness! Daniel, let's go!" But Daniel was trembling, his face pale, his arrogance cracked. His lips parted, but no words came. The old woman stepped closer to Grace, her presence filling the vault. "Use this inheritance, child. Not to become like them, but to remain yourself. Feed the hungry, heal the sick, protect the helpless. In doing so, you will turn $1.5 billion into something greater than gold. You will turn it into life." Grace clutched the leather book to her chest, her tears falling freely now. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." The vault lights glowed brighter, as though the chamber itself approved. Daniel screamed, lunging one last time, but the guards tackled him to the marble floor. His roar echoed through the chamber, wild and broken. Melissa fled toward the exit, her heels clattering, but Ortiz's baton cracked against the floor beside her, stopping her in her tracks. The mercenaries, shaken, raised their hands slowly and stepped back, unwilling to fight against whatever force had entered the room with that old woman. And so, for the first time since the hospital, silence returned. But this silence wasn't empty. It was full of power, full of promise, full of the weight of Grace's choice. She looked down at the book in her lap, then at the shell bracelet glowing softly under the vault lights. The river of her life had reached a bend. From here on, she would decide where it flowed. The chapter ended with her hand resting on the book, and the key still warm in her palm, an extreme moment of revelation and choice. While outside, the storm of greed still waited in the shadows. The vault was silent except for the steady hum of the lights. Daniel lay pinned on the marble floor by two guards, his chest heaving with rage. Melissa stood cornered, her sharp eyes darting for an escape, her painted smile long gone. The mercenaries had lowered their hands, unsettled by what they had just witnessed. And there, at the heart of it all, Grace sat with the leather-bound book in her lap, the shell bracelet glowing faintly against her wrist. The old woman with the mop had vanished as quietly as she appeared. No one saw her leave, but the echo of her words still lingered in the air like smoke after fire. Gentleness is not weakness. It is strength enough to carry nations. Grace pressed her palm against the book. Her mother's handwriting lived inside, guiding her from beyond the grave. For the first time since this storm began, Grace did not feel powerless. She felt chosen. Mr. Lane straightened his tie, his calm voice filling the chamber. Mrs. Carter, we should secure the documents now. Once they're catalogued, the courts will recognize you as sole heir. With this proof, your husband's claims," he paused, glancing at Daniel with controlled disdain, "will crumble." Daniel snarled, struggling against the guards. "She's my wife. You can't just cut me out. I built this marriage. I gave her everything." Grace looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. "You gave me nothing but pain, Daniel, and when I needed you most, you gave me to Melissa." His face twisted, but Grace didn't flinch. For the first time, she saw him not as the man she once loved, but as a stranger wearing his skin. Melissa broke the silence, her voice dripping with venom. "Fine. Take your billions, Grace, but don't think people will love you for it. They'll use you. They'll beg from you. They'll drain you dry. And then, when you're nothing but a tired old woman with empty pockets, where will your kindness be?" Grace's lips curved into the faintest smile. "It will still be alive in the people I helped, and that is more than you'll ever have, Melissa." Melissa's painted face cracked, her words failing her. Mr. Ortiz cleared his throat. "Let's move her, Lane. It's not safe here. We'll transfer the chest and documents under armed escort to the secure trust office." The guards hauled Daniel up. He fought, cursing and spitting, but his strength was gone. He looked smaller now, not because his body had changed, but because his greed had eaten all the space where his dignity once lived. Melissa tried to follow him, but she was shoved back into custody too, her wrists bound tight. Grace wheeled herself forward, clutching the book. Every step of the vault echoed like the sound of history being written. As they left the building, dawn broke across the city. The sky bled orange and gold, painting the streets in light. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on her face. The sun had always risen, no matter how dark the night. And now, it rose for her. The next weeks were a storm of lawyers, paperwork, and headlines. The story spread like wildfire. Woman betrayed in hospital inherits 1.5B fortune. Reporters camped outside the hospital, the bakery, and even the courthouse. Cameras flashed whenever Grace appeared, but she refused to hide. Instead, she spoke softly but firmly to the microphones thrust in her face. "This inheritance is not mine alone. It belongs to the hungry, the sick, and the forgotten. Money without kindness is poison. I choose kindness." Some mocked her, others doubted her, but many listened. She established the Sunrise Foundation, named after her bakery. Within weeks, funds flowed into hospitals, schools, and shelters. Streets where children once begged for food now echoed with laughter as meals were served freely. Nurses received new equipment, teachers received books, families received homes. Grace visited her bakery often, though she no longer worked the ovens. She would sit at the counter, the smell of fresh bread filling the air, and smile at neighbors who came to eat. The "take what you need" jar still stood by the register, but now it was always full. And yet, even as kindness spread, shadows moved. Daniel and Melissa were not finished. Out on bail, they slithered through the city, their pride shattered, but their greed alive. Daniel spent his nights in seedy bars, his voice slurring as he raged about the billions stolen from him. Melissa whispered into his ear, her smile cold, her ambition hotter than ever. One night, Daniel slammed his glass on the table. "If she won't give me the money, I'll take her down another way. If I can't have her billions, I'll ruin her name." Melissa leaned closer, her perfume sharp and sweet. "Then let's do it. Let's make the world hate her." Together, they began plotting. False stories leaked into the press, claims that Grace was hoarding wealth, that she mocked the poor behind closed doors, that she had staged her betrayal in the hospital to gain sympathy. At first, Grace ignored the noise. She focused on building schools and shelters. But when a crowd gathered outside her bakery, chanting ugly words and waving signs, she realized the storm had found her again. Inside, Bisi, a young orphan girl Grace had recently sponsored, clung to her arm. "Why are they shouting at you, Mama Grace? You give them bread. Why do they hate you?" Grace's heart broke. She knelt, brushing the child's cheek gently. "Because kindness frightens those who don't understand it. But don't worry, my dear. The truth is stronger than lies. Still, the weight of it pressed on her. Each headline, each whisper, each angry face. It was Daniel and Melissa's poison dripping into the water she had worked so hard to make clean. Late one night, as she sat in her study with the leather book open before her, she whispered into the silence, "Mother, how do I fight this?" The pages rustled as though moved by a breeze, though the windows were shut. Her eyes fell on a passage she hadn't noticed before, scrawled in her mother's hand. "When darkness spreads lies, do not fight with fists. Shine a brighter truth. Live so boldly in love that even lies burn away in its light." Grace closed her eyes. She felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She knew what she must do. The next morning she called for a press conference. Reporters swarmed, their cameras ready to catch every word. Daniel and Melissa watched from afar, smirking, certain she would crumble under pressure. Grace stepped to the podium, the shell bracelet glinting on her wrist. Her voice was soft, but the microphones carried it to thousands. "You've heard lies about me," she began. "That I hoard wealth, that I mock the poor, that I live for myself. I will not fight lies with anger. I will fight with truth. Come to the shelters, come to the hospitals, come to the schools we have built. Look into the faces of the children who eat because of this inheritance. That is the truth." Her eyes glistened as she lifted the book for all to see. "This was left by my mother. She taught me that money without kindness is poison. I will not let poison win. If anyone doubts me, come to Sunrise Bakes. Eat bread with us. Break bread with us, see if kindness is a lie." The crowd murmured. Some clapped. Others wiped their eyes. Cameras flashed, capturing her not as a scandal, but as a beacon. And in the shadows of the crowd, Daniel's face twisted in fury. Melissa gripped his arm hard. "She's winning them over," she hissed. "If we don't act soon, she'll be untouchable." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we'll hit her where it hurts most. Not her money, not her name, her heart." Melissa's smile returned, cruel and sharp. "The girl," she whispered. "The little one she calls her own now. Bisi." Daniel's eyes glinted with malice. "Yes, if we can't break her with lies, we'll break her with loss." And so the storm gathered again, darker, sharper, aimed not at Grace's fortune this time, but at the small, fragile joy she had taken under her wing. The chapter ended there, on the brink of a new, more personal battle, a test not of money, but of love. The night sky over the city was velvet black, stitched with faint stars. In the distance, the hum of traffic never truly died, but within the walls of Sunrise Bakes, Grace felt at peace. The bakery had become more than a shop. It was a sanctuary. Children laughed in the back room as volunteers passed out warm bread, and neighbors gathered at the long wooden tables to eat and talk like family. Grace sat near the counter, her hands folded over the leather-bound book resting in her lap. The key hung from a chain around her neck now, tucked close to her chest, while the shell bracelet tapped softly whenever she moved. Bisi, the little girl with bright eyes and an untamed laugh, leaned against her side. "Mama Grace," Bisi said softly, nibbling a piece of sweetbread, "will you always be here?" Grace smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. "Yes, my dear. As long as the sun rises, I'll be here. You'll never be alone again." Bisi grinned, her face glowing with trust. Grace's heart swelled. After everything she had lost, her health, her husband's loyalty, her peace, this little girl was proof that kindness planted seeds even in broken ground. But outside, beyond the warmth of the bakery, shadows moved. In a dark alley not far away, Daniel lit a cigarette, the ember glowing red in the night. Melissa stood beside him, her sharp heels clicking on the wet pavement. The two mercenaries from the vault loitered nearby, their eyes restless. Daniel's jaw was tight, his rage barely contained. "She humiliated me again, standing there in front of the world, talking about truth and kindness, as if I'm the villain." Melissa exhaled smoke, her smile bitter. "You are the villain, darling. Own it. But if you want revenge, don't just scratch her. Cut deep. Take the one thing she loves most now." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "The girl." Melissa nodded. She dotes on that little orphan like she's her own daughter. Take her away, and Grace will crumble. What's billions of dollars if your heart is broken? Daniel flicked the cigarette into the gutter, his decision made. Fine. Tomorrow night, we'll take the girl. Grace will finally know what it means to suffer. Melissa's laugh was soft, cold. And when she's on her knees begging, then maybe she'll hand over the fortune just to get the child back. The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. Even they seemed rattled by the cruelty of the plan. But money silences hesitation, and Melissa's promises of payment kept them tethered. The next day dawned bright, golden light spilling through the bakery windows. Grace spent the morning overseeing deliveries, bags of flour, crates of milk, and trays of fresh fruit. Volunteers bustled around, laughter filling the air. Bissy danced between the tables, carrying loaves in her small arms, proudly declaring, "Fresh bread for everyone." Her joy was contagious. Customers clapped and cheered, smiling as she handed them rolls like treasures. Grace watched with tears in her eyes. This is why, she thought. This is what the inheritance was meant for. Not power, not pride, life. By afternoon, she met with Lane and Ortiz in the bakery's back office. The men had stacks of paperwork laid out on the desk. "Your foundation is growing fast," Lane explained. "You're feeding thousands now. But the lies Daniel and Melissa spread are still bubbling online. We'll need to prepare for legal countersuits." Grace nodded. "I'll face them in court if I must, but I won't let their poison stop the work." Ortiz leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We've also received reports that Daniel was seen near this district again. Be cautious, Mrs. Carter." Grace's stomach tightened. "He won't give up, will he?" "No," Ortiz said flatly. "Greed never does." Just then, Bissy burst into the office, clutching a drawing. "Mama Grace, look, I made us a family." Grace took the paper with trembling hands. Stick figures smiled back at her, Grace, Bissy, and a sun shining bright above them. Tears blurred her vision. She hugged the child close, whispering, "Yes, my dear, we are a family." Ortiz watched silently, his face softening. But Lane's eyes grew more alert. "We'll need extra security around the bakery. I don't trust Daniel's silence." That night the storm broke. The bakery had closed, its lights dimmed. Grace tucked Bissy into a small bed in the upstairs room, kissing her forehead gently. "Sleep well, my love." Downstairs she lingered at the counter, sipping tea and reading her mother's book by lamplight. The words glowed softly in the warm air. "When kindness is threatened, remember, light is strongest in the dark." Suddenly, glass shattered at the back of the building. Grace's head snapped up. Footsteps pounded against the tiled floor. Shadows moved quickly through the darkness. She grabbed the pouch with the key and clutched it to her chest. "BC!" she cried, racing for the stairs. But before she reached the top, two masked men blocked her path. One grabbed her arms, the other tore the pouch from her hands. "Where's the girl?" the taller one growled. Grace's heart froze. "Don't touch her!" From behind them, Melissa stepped into the dim light, her smile sharp and cruel. "Oh, Grace, always so dramatic, don't worry. We're not here for you this time." Daniel followed, his face wild with triumph. "Where is she, Grace? Where's the little brat you love so much?" Grace's knees weakened. "You won't take her, I won't let you." Melissa's laugh was cold. "You can't stop us," she nodded to the mercenaries. "Get the girl," Grace screamed, struggling against the man holding her. "No, leave her alone." The mercenaries charged up the stairs. Bissy's frightened cry echoed down. "Mama Grace!" Grace fought with all her strength, but the grip on her arms was iron. Daniel leaned close, his breath hot with rage. "Now you'll know what it feels like to lose everything." Tears streamed down Grace's face as Bissy's cries grew louder. The child's small voice split the night. "Mama Grace, don't let them take me!" The chapter closed there, on the edge of heartbreak, as the storm struck Grace at her most vulnerable, with Daniel and Melissa reaching for the one thing money could never buy, her family. The cries of Bissy tore through the bakery like knives. Grace struggled against the mercenary's grip, her arms burning as she twisted and fought. "Let her go," she screamed, her voice breaking. Upstairs, small feet scrambled against the wooden floor. The mercenaries burst into the room, their boots thudding like drums of doom. "Mama Grace," Bissy wailed again, her voice trembling with terror. Daniel leaned in close to Grace, his eyes wild, his face twisted. "Now you'll finally learn," he hissed. "We take what we want. And you—" He jabbed a finger at her chest. "You can't stop us." Melissa stood behind him, smiling with satisfaction, her arms folded like a queen watching her orders carried out. "You should have given us the money, Grace," she said coldly. "Instead, you gave us a reason to hurt you." Grace's heart thundered. For a moment, despair threatened to crush her. But then, the bracelet on her wrist tapped against the wooden rail of the staircase, its shell clicking like a heartbeat. Gentleness is not weakness, it is a key. Her grandmother's voice rose in her memory. When storms come, the river bends. But the river does not break. Strength surged through her. She drew in a ragged breath, then screamed with all her might, "Bissy, hold on, help is coming." The mercenary holding her laughed. "Who's going to help you now? It's just you, old lady." But he was wrong. The front door burst open with a crash. Lane and Ortiz stormed in, flanked by two plainclothes security officers. Their guns gleamed under the dim lights. "Step away from her!" Lane barked, his voice sharp as a whip. The mercenary holding Grace faltered. In that split second, Grace slammed her heel down on his boot, twisted free and stumbled toward the stairs. Her breath came in sobs, but she pushed herself up each step, calling, "Bissy, I'm coming." Daniel cursed, his face pale with fury. "Stop her!" he roared, charging after her. Melissa followed, her sharp heels clattering against the wood. Grace reached the landing just as the mercenaries dragged Bissy from the bed, the child kicking and screaming. "Let me go, I want Mama Grace." "Over my dead body," Grace said, her voice steady now. The men sneered, but before they could react, Ortiz lunged up the stairs, baton flashing. He struck one mercenary's wrist, sending the man's grip on Bissy loosening. The child bolted toward Grace, tears streaking her face. Grace scooped her up, clutching her tight. Daniel grabbed the other mercenary's weapon and raised it, his eyes blazing. "Give me the key, Grace, or I swear—" A sound cut him off. The old woman with the mop stood at the top of the stairs, her silver hair glowing faintly, her eyes bright as the moon. She raised the mop like a staff and struck it against the floor. The sound echoed through the bakery, louder than thunder. "Daniel Carter," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "you call yourself strong, but you are weaker than a leaf in the wind. You chase gold and forget love. You break your vows and mock the sick. And now you raise your hand against a child? The river does not forget. Tonight the river sweeps you away." Daniel froze, his arm trembling, the weapon shaking in his grip. Melissa's face paled, her confident mask cracking. Who are you?" Daniel stammered. The old woman's gaze burned. "I am the echo of your wife's grandmother. I am the prayer of her mother. I am the drum of destiny, beating louder than your greed." Grace's breath caught. She looked down at the shell bracelet and understood. It had been a gift not of chance but of design, a tether between her and this guardian spirit. The old woman stepped closer, her voice like a storm. "Daniel, you are done. Leave this place, or the river will bury you." Daniel's face twisted. For a heartbeat, fear flickered in his eyes. Then pride drowned it. He snarled and raised the weapon again. But before he could strike, Lane tackled him. The gun clattered to the floor. Security swarmed, pinning Daniel and Melissa both. The mercenaries surrendered, their courage gone in the face of something far greater than bullets. Grace held Bissy close, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're safe, my love. You're safe." The old woman smiled softly at her, her eyes kind again. "You see, child, gentleness is not weakness. It is power that outlives storms." And with that, she faded once more, her form dissolving into the shadows like mist at dawn. Days later, Daniel and Melissa stood trial. The evidence of their crimes was overwhelming. Attempted kidnapping, assault, fraud. Grace did not attend the hearings. She chose not to waste her heart on their downfall. Instead, she spent her time at the bakery, sitting with Bissy and feeding the hungry. Reporters asked if she hated Daniel. Grace shook her head. "Hate is poison," she said softly. I will not drink it. I only pity him. He had love and chose greed. That is punishment enough. The court sentenced Daniel and Melissa to long years behind bars. Their names faded into shame. Grace, however, only grew brighter. With her inheritance, she expanded the Sunrise Foundation. New bakeries opened in poor neighborhoods, each with a jar labeled, "Take what you need." Hospitals received funding, schools were built. BC, once an orphan, now had a home filled with love. And though storms still came, rumors, lawsuits, challenges, Grace no longer feared them. She had learned the truth. Storms may bend the river, but they cannot break it. The chapter closed with Grace standing outside her bakery at sunset, BC holding her hand. The sky burned gold and crimson, the same colors as hope. Grace whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "Kindness is the only inheritance worth leaving behind." The months that followed were like a sunrise after a storm. Grace's life blossomed in ways she never could have imagined while lying helpless in that hospital bed. Where once she had been mocked, abandoned, and left to suffer, now she stood as a symbol of hope. Not because of the billions she inherited, but because of what she chose to do with them. The Sunrise Foundation grew across the nation. Shelters fed the hungry. Schools rose where children had once studied in broken shacks. Hospitals received modern machines, their walls painted with bright colors instead of peeling gray. Every project carried the same message, carved into stone or painted above the doors. Kindness is not weakness, it is the key. Grace made sure of it. But even as her work expanded, she remained simple. She still visited her bakery every morning, sipping tea while volunteers filled baskets with bread. She still kept the "take what you need" jar on the counter, smiling when strangers shyly dropped coins or slipped notes of thanks inside. And every evening, she returned upstairs to tuck Bissy into bed, reading her stories of rivers, birds, and brave women who carried light through dark places. Her inheritance had given her power, but her heart reminded her daily that true wealth was love. One bright morning, Grace received a letter delivered by hand. Its paper was thick, sealed with wax, bearing the same crest of the two birds, holding a key. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside, the words were written in neat, formal script. To Mrs. Grace Carter, the legacy entrusted to you has been carried with wisdom and dignity. You have proven yourself a true heir, not of gold but of spirit. As such, you are invited to the Council of Custodians, keepers of fortunes across the world, who have vowed to use their wealth for good. Your mother once refused this seat, choosing a quieter path. Now it is offered to you. The choice is yours. Grace folded the letter against her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. Her mother had stepped away from this responsibility, but she had left the path open for her daughter. It was not just about inheritance anymore, it was about destiny. That evening, Grace sat in the bakery with Bissy. The child played with crayons on the table, humming to herself. Grace stroked her hair gently. "Bissy," she said softly, "would you like to travel with me? To see the world?" Bissy's eyes lit up. "Will there be bread there too?" Grace laughed. "Yes, my love. We'll make sure of it." The day Grace attended her first custodian's meeting, she wore not jewels nor gowns, but a simple dress. Around her wrist the shell bracelet glimmered. Around her neck the heavy key hung like a promise. Leaders from every corner of the world gathered in the grand hall, their fortunes vast, their faces solemn. But when Grace entered, heads turned, not because she was the richest, but because she carried herself with a gentleness that glowed stronger than diamonds. She spoke only once that day, her voice clear and soft. Wealth is not meant to sit in vaults like prisoners. It is meant to walk among people, to heal wounds, to feed bellies, to open doors. If money does not serve love, then it serves nothing at all. The hall fell silent, and then one by one the custodians nodded, their eyes heavy with respect. Grace had not just inherited billions, she had inherited a legacy of light. Meanwhile, Daniel and Melissa's fates unraveled. Behind bars, Daniel's fury burned him hollow. He raged at everyone, guards, lawyers, even himself. The greed that had once driven him now gnawed at him like a starving beast, leaving only emptiness. Melissa, ever cunning, tried to charm her way through prison walls, but lies don't buy freedom. In time, even her beauty faded, leaving her bitter and forgotten. Grace never visited them. She never cursed them either. Whenever their names came up in whispers, she would simply say, "I wish them healing, though I may never see it." And then she returned to her work, pouring her life into kindness. Years passed. The bakery grew into a chain across the country, each one carrying the spirit of the first: warm ovens, open hands, and a jar labeled, "Take what you need." The Sunrise Foundation built hospitals in villages, scholarships for children, and shelters for the homeless. BC grew under Grace's love. The shy, frightened orphan became a strong, radiant young woman, carrying her mother's lessons with pride. She often stood beside Grace at charity events, her voice bold as she declared, "Kindness built me, and kindness will build the world." Grace's hair turned silver in time, but her eyes never lost their light. She became known across the nation not as the woman who inherited $1.5 billion, but as the woman who turned it into hope. And on her final public speech, standing before a crowd of thousands, she held up her mother's leather book and spoke with the same steady strength that had carried her through storms. "Once, I was mocked in a hospital bed. Once, I was left to die. But what they didn't know was that I carried an inheritance greater than money. I carried kindness. And when the storm came, kindness was the roof that did not fall." To everyone listening, I say this: be gentle, be kind. It may look small, but it is the greatest key of all. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices carrying like a river. That night, as Grace sat by her window with Bissy, now grown into a woman, she saw a figure in the street below. An old woman with silver hair pushing a mop, the same eyes, the same smile. The woman looked up at her, lifted 2 fingers in a salute, and vanished into the night. Grace's tears fell, but her heart was steady. She whispered to herself, "The river remembers, and so will I." And with that, her story, full of storms and sunrises, rested in peace. Because Grace had fulfilled the destiny her grandmother foretold, her mother entrusted, and her own choices carried, to prove that kindness is never weakness, but the strongest inheritance of all. Thank you for following Grace's journey